A doorman in a charcoal double-breasted coat puts his hand up, flat, open, final, and tells the man standing in front of him that he cannot enter the building. Not because his name is missing from the list, not because there is a dress code violation, because the man standing in front of him arrived on a motorcycle instead of a car. Because his jacket is worn at both elbows, because he is standing alone, without anyone beside him who signals what he might be worth. No, quiet, almost courteous. The arm stays up. 30 feet behind them, through 2 sets of glass doors, a ballroom holds 340 people who paid $1,800 a plate to attend the Pediatric Research Initiative's annual benefit. One table, the host table at the center of the room, bears a small placard that has been placed there with care. Reserved, Keanu Reeves, lead sponsor. The amount beside that name, printed in the program currently being set at every seat inside, is $400,000. The man on the sidewalk turns up the collar of his jacket against the November wind off Lake Michigan. He does not argue. He does not produce a phone. He looks at the doorman the way you look at someone doing something they will regret, with patience rather than heat. Then, he steps to the curb. One call. Under 2 minutes. Back turned so the 2 young staff members near the entrance cannot quite hear. By the time he ends the call, something has already been set in motion. He is just not going to be the one who tells anyone about it. There is a private members club on the near north side of Chicago called the Alderton House. It sits between a law firm and a wealth management office on a block where the buildings do not need signs because the people who belong there already know the address. The structure was built in 1921, restored in 2007, and costs $14,000 a year to join, assuming you are invited, which most people are not. The lobby has gray marble floors worn smooth in the center, where members have walked the same path for a century. Carved dark walnut paneling. Photographs going back to Prohibition. Men in dark suits who look as though they have already decided the outcome of everything. The coat check attendant at the front entrance starts her shift at 50 and goes up from there. The clientele is old money and newer money that has learned to dress like old money. In Chicago in November, that means overcoats with a particular weight to them, and a quiet proprietary ease with every room they enter. The benefit had been hosted here for 11 consecutive years. This year's was the largest in the organization's history, with $2.3 million expected before the evening ended. The room was candlelit. The string quartet near the east wall was playing something unhurried, and the silverware had the kind of heft that quietly told you where you were. At 7:42 in the evening, a black motorcycle pulled to the curb on the north side of the building. The man who climbed off it was wearing a dark jacket with wear at both elbows, a clean white shirt, dark jeans, and boots that had been resoled at least once. No security. No assistant. No one with a clipboard walking out to meet him. He locked the helmet to the bike and walked toward the entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders forward against the cold. The head doorman saw him coming from 40 feet away. He had 15 seconds to form an opinion, and he used all of them. Victor Haas had been the director of member services at the Alderton House for 22 years. He was 61 years old, fit in the specific way of men who take pride without appearing to, silver-haired, straight-backed, with posture that said not that he had been military, but that he had decided a long time ago how he intended to be seen. He wore his uniform the way other men wear a position. The charcoal coat was custom. He could tell when an event was running 3 minutes behind by the particular shift in the air near the lobby bar. He could tell by sound when something had gone wrong at valet. After 22 years, the building had become an extension of his own attention. What he did not talk about what almost no one at the Alderton house knew, was where he had come from. Victor Haas grew up in the Pullman neighborhood on Chicago's far south side, in a two-flat above a currency exchange, on a block that smelled like diesel and standing water in summer and ice melt, and nothing in winter. His father worked sanitation. His mother ran a cash register at a grocery store 3 days a week and cleaned offices the other 4. Victor wore the same 2 pairs of pants through most of 7th and 8th grade. He understood class not as an abstraction, but as a physical sensation. The specific heat in the face of being looked at and found lacking. He had walked into a hotel lobby at 17 to ask about an entry-level job and been told, quietly but clearly, that he might be more comfortable looking elsewhere. He was wearing his best clothes. He remembered, with a clarity that had not softened in 44 years, exactly what those clothes were and how they had fit. He got a job somewhere else. Then another. Then another. He moved up through food and beverage, through event management, through member services. He studied the world he was trying to enter with the focused attention of someone who cannot afford to make mistakes. He entered it. He sealed himself inside it. And he made a decision, not consciously, not in words, but in the way these decisions are actually made, that the door worked in one direction. You earned your way in, or you did not come in at all. By the time he was 40, he had almost convinced himself the rule was about standards rather than fear. On the evening of November 14th, a man in a worn jacket walked toward him at the Alderton house entrance, unhurried, making eye contact without deference, and everything Victor Haas had spent 4 decades constructing around himself made a very fast, very certain decision. He raised his hand. "Sir, this is a private event, members and invited guests only." The man stopped. "I am an invited guest." His voice was even, no edge in it. "My name should be on the list." Victor did not check the list. He looked at the motorcycle. He looked at the jacket. He looked at the absence of anything around this person that said what he needed to see. "I am not finding you, sir. I am going to have to ask you to step back from the entrance." A beat. The man looked at him, not with anger, not with disbelief, but with something quieter and harder to dismiss. "You did not look at the list." Victor's arm stayed where it was. "Sir, please step back." The young doorman, standing 6 feet to Victor's left. His name was Marcus. He was 24 and 8 weeks into the job, felt his body go completely still. He had seen the name on the guest list that afternoon. He had paused over it, read it twice. He knew exactly who this man was. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Keanu Reeves looked at Marcus, not through him, the way many guests look through staff, but actually at him. A question in that look. "You see this, don't you?" Marcus looked at the marble steps. "It's all right." The voice was quiet and without heat. "You are doing your job. I understand that." He turned up his collar, looked once more at Victor, that patient, unhurried look, the one that carried no accusation and somehow carried more weight because of it, then walked back toward the curb. No scene, no raised voice. He simply walked back. At the motorcycle he stopped, turned his back to the entrance, and made the call. Marcus watched him from the door, hands loose at his sides. Something was sitting in his chest that he was not going to put down easily. He had just watched a man be turned away from an event he had paid $400,000 to sponsor. He had said nothing. He was still deciding what to do with that when the lobby door behind him opened, and the event coordinator, Elena Park, came through at nearly a run. "Marcus, Mr. Reeves should have arrived 20 minutes ago." "Have you seen?" Marcus pointed toward the curb. Elena followed his hand to the figure by the motorcycle. She looked at the entrance. She looked at Victor, who was watching the street with the careful stillness of a man who has begun to calculate. Victor, her voice was flat and controlled. What happened at the entrance tonight? What happened in the next 30 minutes would be described differently by everyone who witnessed any part of it. Elena went to the curb. She spoke with Keanu for 4 minutes. He was unhurried, gracious, did not perform anger. She returned to the entrance and spoke to Victor in a voice that did not carry, but whose register was clear enough. Victor held his position. He had run this entrance for 22 years. He had his reasons. He did not abandon his judgment because someone applied pressure. At 8:09, a car arrived, a black-towned car, no markings. The man who stepped out was Thomas Whitfield, chairman of the Alderton House Board of Directors. Victor recognized him. Victor would have described Thomas Whitfield, in other circumstances, as someone whose presence at the entrance required a particular level of care. He was in his overcoat and carrying his phone, and he had the look of someone who has decided not to be angry yet and has not quite gotten there. He spoke to Keanu at the curb for less than a minute. Then he walked to the entrance. Mr. Haas. The chairman's voice was level. I am asking you to escort Mr. Reeves to his table. Personally, Victor looked at the motorcycle, at the jacket, at Keanu Reeves standing on the sidewalk in the November cold, watching the conversation with no visible expression. 22 years. He had not built what he had built by surrendering his judgment when someone called from a board position. Mr. Whitfield, I understand the sensitivity here, but our guest standard, Victor, the word landed without weight, which gave it more weight than any emphasis could have. This is not a discussion. Victor turned. Marcus, open the door. He walked to the curb, stood in front of Keanu Reeves, and said, Mr. Reeves, please allow me to escort you inside. Keanu looked at him for a moment. Thank you. Nothing more than that. They walked through the lobby together. Victor's posture was what it always was. But in the high-ceilinged anteroom, the reception hall between the lobby bar and the main ballroom, where perhaps 15 guests stood in conversation or moved between rooms, Victor stopped. He turned to a passing staff member and said, in a voice that carried further than he perhaps calculated, please note in the event log that the dress standard exception this evening was authorized at the board level. The anteroom went quiet. Not all at once. Table by table, conversation by conversation, the sound reduced until the only thing audible was the string quartet through the far doors and the particular silence of a room full of people who have all decided, at the same moment, to listen. Keanu stopped. He turned. He looked at Victor with the same patient attention he had used at the entrance, the look of someone watching something unfold and understanding it more completely than the person enacting it. Mr. Haas, his voice was low and conversational. If I had walked up to that entrance tonight without my name on any list, no connection to anyone inside, nothing in my pocket but a parking ticket, just a man and a jacket who wanted to come in. What would have happened? Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Near the coat check, a woman in a charcoal evening dress, she was perhaps 72, silver-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who has watched many rooms over many decades, said nothing at all. She did not need to. The expression she wore in that moment was the one several people would try to describe later. And none of them would get it entirely right, but all of them would remember it. Keanu nodded once. Walked through the ballroom doors. Victor stood in the anteroom while the sound gradually returned around him. Then, he walked back to the entrance. At 9:34, Keanu excused himself from his table. He did not move toward the exit. He moved toward the back of the room, spoke briefly to Elena Park, and followed the service hallway past the kitchen. Victor's office was at the end of a narrow corridor that smelled of old wood and the remnants of whatever the kitchen had been finishing. A small room, a desk, a chair, a metal filing cabinet, a framed photograph of the Alderton house in 1924, and a window that looked onto the service courtyard. Victor was sitting at the desk with his jacket over the back of the chair and his reading glasses pushed up on his head when the knock came. He did not say, "Come in." The door opened anyway. Keanu stood in the doorway, still in the jacket with the worn elbows, still in the boots. He looked at the room. He looked at the photograph. Then he sat down in the chair across from the desk without being invited, not as a power move, but with the ease of someone who does not need the chair to belong anywhere and is not trying to take anything. "I did not come back here to embarrass you," he said, "or to ask for an apology." Victor looked at him. "Then, what did you come back here for?" A pause. "I came back because I wanted to understand." Victor was quiet. After 22 years in this building, he had developed a precise sense for when someone was performing understanding versus when they were actually trying to achieve it. This man was doing the second thing. "I run this entrance the way it is supposed to be run," Victor said. "I believe you." Keanu was quiet for a moment. "What made you start caring so much about how it ran?" The question sat in the room. Victor looked at the desk. Then, surprising himself, he answered it. He did not tell the official version. He told the other one, the currency exchange, the 2 pairs of pants, the hotel lobby when he was 17, the man behind that desk who had looked at him and suggested, quietly and politely, that he might be more comfortable elsewhere. He told it in pieces, the way you tell something when you are tired of not telling it. Keanu did not interrupt, did not offer comfort in the pauses, did not nod along in a way that made it feel like he was waiting for it to be over. He just listened. When Victor finished, the kitchen sounds from down the hall filled the quiet. "I know what it is to walk into a room and wait for the moment someone figures out that you don't belong," Keanu said finally. "I didn't grow up here. There were years I would sit with people in very expensive places and brace for the moment the expression changed, when they placed me or couldn't place me, and the room temperature shifted a few degrees." He paused. "And I also know what happens when you spend long enough trying to get through a door. Sometimes you forget the door was the problem, not you. And sometimes, without quite deciding to, you end up on the other side of it, doing the exact thing that was done to you." Victor did not answer. Keanu leaned forward slightly, the young man at the entrance. "Marcus." Victor looked up. "He knew who I was. I could see it. He was going to say something, and then he stopped. Because you were standing next to him." A pause. "What do you think it cost him tonight? Having to choose between what felt right and what felt safe?" Victor closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a long moment. When he opened them, Keanu was still looking at him. Not with accusation, with something that was harder to sit across from than accusation, because it left you nowhere to push. "You have built something real here," Keanu said. "That photograph is 40 years before you arrived, and you are still the person who cares most about what it means. That is not nothing. That is actually remarkable." He stood up. "I am not asking for an apology. I am not asking you to kneel. I am asking you to go back out there and look at that kid the way someone should have looked at you in 1979. He placed his hand briefly on the corner of the desk, the way you touch something when the gesture needs to leave a weight behind. Then, he walked to the door and left without another word. Victor did not move for 7 minutes. Marcus was back at the entrance post at 9:58 when Victor Haas came through the lobby. Victor was wearing his jacket again. His posture was what it always was. But something had shifted, not a softening exactly, but a different quality of stillness. The kind that comes on the other side of a decision. He stopped in front of Marcus. He looked at the street, at the motorcycle still at the curb, at the November sky above Michigan Avenue. Then he looked at Marcus, and Marcus saw something in that look that he had not seen in 8 weeks on this job, and that he suspected he would not see again for a long time. "You were right to hesitate tonight," Victor said. "I was not." Marcus did not know what to say. He was 24 years old, and a man 37 years his senior was standing in front of him being honest. And it was the kind of moment you understand better years later than you do in the instant it happens. "You will not be in that position again," Victor said. "Not on my account." He placed his hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder. One firm, brief press. Then he turned and walked back into the ballroom. Inside, the auction had exceeded projections by $180,000. At the lead sponsor table, Keanu was leaning forward with his elbows on the cloth, talking with the hospital's chief of pediatric oncology, actually listening. The kind of listening you can see from across a room. Victor walked to the table, waited at the edge of the conversation for a natural pause. When it came, he spoke directly. "Mr. Reeves, I owe you an apology, not because of who you are or what your name means in this room, because what I did at that entrance was wrong. It was wrong before I knew anything about you. I am sorry." The nearby tables went quiet. Someone had stopped pretending not to listen. Keanu looked at Victor, a beat. Then the real smile, slightly crooked, unhurried, the kind you do not manufacture for rooms. "Thank you for saying that." He put out his hand. Victor took it. Someone at the adjacent table began to clap. It moved through the room the way things move when people feel them rather than perform them, not a wave, but a spreading. Victor nodded once, walked back to his post. At the entrance, Marcus was looking at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were doing what eyes do in those moments. He stopped trying to pretend otherwise. At 10:19, Keanu settled his table's portion of the evening at the registration desk, $4,600 in addition to his sponsorship. He shook 3 hands on his way to the door. At the entrance, he stopped in front of Marcus. "You were going to say something out there," he said. "I saw it happen and then not happen. The fact that it cost you something to stay quiet, that actually matters. Not less than speaking would have. Maybe more." He held Marcus's eyes. "Remember that." He walked out, put on his helmet, and rode north on Michigan Avenue until the taillights disappeared into the dark. The story did not stay inside the Alderton house. By the following Wednesday, 3 board members had raised the evening's events in an email thread that Victor Haas was not copied on. The thread was careful, diplomatic, and unambiguous. A review of member services protocols was necessary, and the head of member services was expected to participate. Victor knew about the thread. In a building like the Alderton house, you always know, and he spent most of a Tuesday evening at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold. Looking at a career he had spent 4 decades building and trying to decide what it had actually been. He did not resign. His wife, when he told her everything, said the thing that cost her something to say. "Victor, you have been protecting yourself from 1979 for 40 years. And it isn't working anymore." Then she went to bed and left him with it. He showed up for the review. He did not rationalize, and he did not minimize. He said that he had made an error in judgment, that the error had come from a place he now understood better than he had, and that he intended to correct it. He described, in specific terms, what that correction would look like. The board accepted his accounting. Revenue dropped by about 22% over the following 2 months. Regulars did not make a scene. They simply stopped coming. Nobody argued. They just weren't there anymore on Tuesday evenings, and then Thursday evenings. And then the lunch service that had been reliable for 11 years ran at half capacity through January. Victor sat with the numbers and did not look for someone to blame. The changes he made were not announced. They were simply made. He requested a meeting with Marcus 1 week after the review and asked him to walk through the guest confirmation process from the beginning, not as a supervisor reviewing procedure, but as someone who genuinely wanted to see where it had failed. Marcus did it. Victor listened through the whole of it without interrupting. At the end, he said, "If you ever feel that way again, the way you felt that night, I want you to say something. To me, or above me. That is not disloyalty. That is the job." Marcus said okay. "Then, I will." The Alderton House's guest experience protocols were revised over the following 6 weeks. Not a philosophy statement. A 3-page procedural document that described exactly how to handle guest verification when appearance and expectation diverged. The document opened with a single line that Victor had written himself, and that he had written last. After everything else, the standard we uphold here is not exclusivity. It is dignity. The following spring, the Pediatric Research Initiative approached the club about hosting a community open house. 1 Saturday afternoon per year, the building open to anyone in the neighborhood who wanted to see it. The idea had been proposed by a previous director years earlier and quietly abandoned. Victor approved it in a single email. No conditions attached. The first one drew 67 people. A family from Bronzeville who had walked past the building for 23 years and never been inside. A retired librarian who had catered an event here in 1988 and seen only the service entrance. 3 teenagers from a school group who touched the walnut paneling and looked at the 1921 photograph and were quiet for a while, the way people are quiet when something is older than anything they have stood next to before. Victor stood at the entrance that afternoon, not in the charcoal coat, just his shirt and his good shoes, and he welcomed them the way he had learned, a very long time ago, that he had needed to be welcomed. Marcus left the Alderton house 14 months after the November evening, not because anything was wrong, because he had saved enough and learned enough to take the next step. He moved back to his mother's neighborhood on the northwest side and took a position managing a small hotel, 48 rooms, business travelers and airport connections. Nothing like the Alderton house. He ran the front desk with precision and the kind of care Victor had taught him, and he added one thing Victor had not explicitly taught, but had demonstrated once in a small office at the end of a service hallway. He extended to people the benefit of what they might be, rather than the limit of how they appeared. He sent Victor a text on his first day in the new position. 3 words. "I remember everything." Victor read it at his desk, in the room with the photograph of the building from 1921 and the window onto the courtyard. He read it twice. He put his phone face down on the desk, and the expression on his face was one that none of the 4 decades of members or arriving guests or evening events had ever seen there before. Years later, in a regional hospitality trade journal, Marcus was asked to talk about his philosophy of guest services. The interviewer asked who had shaped his thinking. He named 2 people. The second name was Victor Haas. "He taught me that the door you guard says more about you than about the people you let through it," Marcus said. I did not know at the time that he was teaching me that. But he was. I have thought about this story more than I expected to when I started telling it. What stays with me is not the composure on that sidewalk, though that is remarkable. It is not the apology either, though it is the kind of apology you rarely watch happen in your life. What stays with me is Victor Haas at a kitchen table in the dark, with a cup of coffee that went cold, looking at 40 years of something and trying to understand what it had actually been. I think about how many of us have done that. Built a way of being in the world, a standard, a habit, a rule we enforce, and told ourselves it was about excellence, about care, about simply how things ought to be done, when underneath it was about something that happened a long time ago in a lobby or a doorway or a classroom, when the thing we were really protecting was old and small and frightened and had never been given a reason to stop. The line that I keep returning to is the one about the door being the problem, not you. I am not sure that is entirely true. The door was part of the problem, and so was the choice to spend 4 decades standing on the other side of it doing the same thing. But I understand what was meant. And I find myself thinking about all the ways we carry old wounds into new rooms without realizing we have brought them with us. All the standards we uphold that are really just protection. All the gates we guard when what we are actually guarding is something from 1979. I do not know what I would have done in that parking lot, or in that office. I would like to think I would have found the better version of myself. Honestly, I am not sure. Most of us are not sure. And maybe that is the question worth carrying, not what someone else should have done, but what we actually do when the moment arrives for us. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves's well-known reputation for grace and patience in the face of dismissal. If this story gave you something to carry, drop it in the comments. Not just what you thought of it, but what it brought up for you. Those are sometimes different things. If you know someone who needs to hear it tonight, send it to them. You probably already know who. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. See you in the next one.